Hilchos Shevuos Perek Shmini, the Laws of Oaths, Chapter 8. We're continuing the topic of Shevuos HaPikadon, the oath of deposit. That basically means a scenario where you're holding somebody else's money, in whatever form that takes, loan, a stolen object, a deposit. The man demands it back from you, and not only do you deny ever holding the object, but you swear to substantiate that denial. That comes with a special prohibition for which you're liable to repay the principal plus a fifth and a guilt offering. Now, as we go into the chapter, I want to repeat something we learned yesterday, plus give another point of introduction. Yesterday, we learned the difference between what's called mamain and knas. There are two types of payments in the Torah. One is restitutional payment, where the payment you make matches the crime that you committed. Whatever, let's say, a person damages another person's property. The property goes down in value, you have to make restitution, pay back for whatever the property went down in value. That's mamain. Then you have a category of payment called knas. Knas means a punitive fine. It's an arbitrary payment amount decided by the Torah. Doesn't necessarily match the crime. The Torah says in this case you got to pay a certain amount of money, either extra or less than what typically the crime would require. That's called knas. A very fundamental difference between mamain and knas, without getting into the reasons for this difference, is that if you admit to owing mamain, you have to pay it. If you admit to owing a knas, you don't have to pay it. That's just the way it works. If you come forward to the court and you say, I did something which requires me to make restitutional payment, the court will fine you that payment. But if you come forward to the courts and you say, I did an act which requires me to pay a punitive fine, by your own admission, we're not going to make you pay a fine. Therefore, the Rambam says, and we learned this yesterday and is going to repeat it again today, the whole prohibition of Shevuos HaPikadon only applies if it's talking about that type of money, which had you admitted to having it, you'd be required to pay it. But if the accusation being leveled against you is such that if you were to respond, yeah, you know what, your accusation is correct, all that you would be required to pay would be a knas, then when you deny owing that money and you swear to that denial, you don't transgress the law of Shevuos HaPikadon. That's the way it works. That has to do with the scenarios chosen by the Torah. Shevuos HaPikadon only applies in mamain cases, not in knas cases. That being said, let's go to a specific point of introduction, which is the Torah's penalties for stealing. When a person steals an object, and Geneva has a specific meaning of not open robbery in broad daylight, you went stealthily, hiddenly, in secret. You broke into a guy's home and you stole something. Geneva comes with mamain and knas. There's restitutional payment to be made in which you have to return the object that you stole or its value. Plus, you have to pay back typically double the amount, what's called kefel. Pay back what you stole times 2. That times 2 is a knas. There's another step which says, if you didn't only steal the object, but you went ahead and sold it or slaughtered it, in specific cases of animals, an ox or a sheep, then you have to make a 4 or 5 time payment. Not just pay the value of the animal that you stole, but pay its value 4 or 5 times more. For slaughtering it, it's 4 or 5 times, it's 4 for a sheep, 5 for an ox. But for either slaughtering or selling, you incur this extra payment. This, of course, is also a knas, a punitive fine. So, having these payments in mind, and knowing the rule that we just said, that the whole scenario of Shevuos HaPikadon only plays out in a case of mamain, not in a case of knas, let's go into the Rambam. Says the Rambam Halacha Aleph, Hagoyniv Sheireh Shel Chaveirah Utvachah Mechareh. A person steals an ox belonging to a friend, and he slaughters it or sells it. Tovei Bal HaShoir. Later, the owner of the ox comes and charges this thief, V'amar le, and he tells him, Ganavta Shoiri, V'tavachta Macharta. You stole my ox, and you slaughtered it / sold it. You owe me restitutional payment, A, plus you owe me the 4 or 5 times knas payment for having sold it or slaughtered it. Now listen to what the guy answers. V'hu Omer, the defendant says, Ganavti, indeed I stole the ox. So he's not disputing the basic claim. He's not disputing the basic claim of Geneva for which he's going to have to pay both restitutional payment and the second payment, the kefel. But he disputes the second claim. He says, I didn't slaughter it, I didn't sell it. I don't owe you the extra 4 or 5 times. V'nishba, and he swears to that denial. So even though part of the claim was dealing with restitutional payment, but because that's what he admitted to, and his denial, if you focused on the denial exclusively, all that was zoomed in on was a payment of knas. Says the Rambam, in this case he's exempt, he's not held liable for making a false deposit oath. For had he come forth and admitted to slaughtering or selling, he wouldn't pay the 4 or 5 punitive payments. For that is a punitive fine imposed by the Torah, as will be explained in the laws of thievery in Book 10 of the Rambam. Which therefore converts this person to a case of denying not mammon. He did not deny restitutional payment, he only denied punitive fines. Therefore he's exempt from the deposit oath. However, because in the end of the day he swore falsely, assuming the case was of course where he did slaughter or sell it, he's held liable for a false regular oath. For the fact of the matter is, he swore falsely, saying that he didn't slaughter the animal when indeed he did. And we're going to see over 10 times, I think, throughout this chapter, that the Rambam repeats the point. Whenever there's a scenario where he's exempt from the deposit oath, he's still held liable for making a false basic oath. And the Radvaz, one of the primary commentators on the Rambam over here, wonders why the Rambam keeps repeating the point again and again, and he suggests that perhaps it's because while the transgression of one is less than the other, the punishment of the Shevuos Bitoy is lashes. It's more extreme. And so you have to be able to repeat that point each time, that even when you're exempt from the Shevuos HaPikadon, you're still going to be held liable for the larger punishment for the other Aveira of doing a false regular oath. Says the Rambam Malacha Beis, a similar scenario. A person tells a friend, Hey mis sheircha es avdi, I accuse you, your ox killed my servant. Now when a person's ox kills someone else's servant, the Torah says this is not a case of restitutional payment, there's a knas. There's a punitive, arbitrary fine that's imposed, 30 shkalim, 30 coins. So the accusation here concerns one of knas. The kafar v'nishba, and the man in response denies the claim outright and swears to that denial. So here, he's dealing with a case of knas, and therefore we're going to see in a moment he's exempt. Another case, if a servant charges his own master, and he says, you knocked out my tooth, you blinded my eye. These are grounds, according to the Torah, for a master to have to pay, but not restitutional payment, a fine. The kafar v'nishba, and the master denied it and swore to the denial. Patur mishvas hapikadin. In both cases, the person being accused of his ox killing the servant and the master of the servant himself, he's exempt from having sworn a false deposit oath. Had he admitted he wouldn't pay because it's a punitive fine we're dealing with. And as we said before, Shevuos HaPikadon only applies to mammon and not to knas. But he's still held liable, the Rambam repeats, he's still liable for making a false regular oath. And anything similar, the same law would apply. Halacha gimel hateveas chaverai b'davar sheyesh by knas she'enei mishalem ma'aseh al piatzmai k'meisha b'yarnu v'yesh by mammon shu mishalem ma'aseh al piatzmai. It's a lot of Hebrew. Let's read it again. Point is, he's dealing with a charge that has both elements. Hateveas chaverai, a person. I'm reading it again. Hateveas chaverai, a person charges a friend. B'davar sheyesh by knas, in an act that carries both a punitive fine, which he wouldn't pay by his own admission, as we just explained. V'yesh by mammon, but the same claim also carries restitutional payment, which he would have to pay, even had he admitted on his own word. The kafar b'chol davar v'nishba, and the man denies the entire claim and swears to the denial. Since part of the claim was dealing with mammon, he's held liable for making a false deposit oath. Ketzad, what would be an example of this? If the friend charged the man and said, Anastoi pitisa biti, you raped or seduced my daughter. We learned in the end of the 4th book of the Rambam that when a person rapes or seduces, he needs to make multiple payments. Some of them are restitutional, the embarrassment, the disgrace. Some of them are punitive. There's a 50 shekel coin, knas, fine, for the rapist or the seducer. So when you accuse another man of having raped or seduced one's daughter, that accusation carries with it restitutional payment and punitive payment. So the man being accused responds, no, it's out and out not true. I never raped, I never seduced. V'nishban, he swore to that denial, and it turns out that he was lying. Then he's liable for the deposit oath. Because even though the fine payments, the punitive payments, he wouldn't pay by his own admission, had he indeed admitted to the rape or to the seduction, he would have to pay the restitutional payments, the humiliation, the disgrace, as we defined it in the end of the fourth book of the Rambam. Similarly, a person tells a friend, Ganavta shayri, you stole my ox, and he says, I didn't steal. That accusation of stealing carries with it restitutional and punitive payments. As I mentioned before, when you steal something regularly, you have to pay back the principal, that's restitutional, plus you have to pay back a second time, which is punitive. So when he says, I didn't steal, and he swears to the denial, chayav b'shvuas hapikadon, he's liable for a false deposit oath. Even though the admission of his own wouldn't cause him to pay double the amount, it would cause him to pay the principal, the restitutional part, the mamain part. So since part of his denial involves mamain, he's held accountable for that and he's liable for a deposit oath. A person tells a friend, you wounded me. He says, no, I did not. Hey, your ox killed my ox. He says, no, it never happened. He didn't kill your ox. V'nishba, and he swore. Chayav b'shvuas hapikadon. He's liable to the deposit oath. She'ilu hayda hayachayav b'shalim. These are classic cases of restitutional payment. You wound a friend. Your ox wounds someone else's ox. The payment you have to make covers the damages in a very simple compensational restitutional way. So therefore, since the claim concerned mamain, you're liable for swearing falsely. Halacha hey, we're about to embark on some laws that are related to custodians. Now we're going to learn about custodians in great detail in the Rambam's 13th book. However, just a short introduction suffices over here. Typically, the Torah speaks of 4 types of custodians. Shomer chinam. Shomer chinam means an unpaid watchman. You have a good friend, he'll do you a favor. Listen, I'm traveling for 2 weeks. Can you watch my very important pen collection? You're not going to pay him. His level of responsibility is very low. Only if he's completely negligent with your stuff does he have to make payment for it. But geneva va'aveda, if it was lost or stolen, and certainly oines, if there was circumstances beyond his control, he's totally exempt. On the other extreme, we have what's called the shoyel. The shoyel is the borrower. When you borrow something, you ask somebody to use their object, you actually assume the most responsibility. Not only if you were negligent, but even if it was stolen or lost, geneva va'aveda, and even if something happened beyond your control, the bottom line is you took the borrowing, you're liable to replace it in all cases. So shomer chinam never, shoyel always. Soicher is in the middle, a renter. You rent, so you're not really fully freeloading here, you're also paying for the usage. So therefore you're kind of in the middle. You're liable to replace it if it's stolen or lost. You're not liable if it's lost beyond your control. And the same thing, although I didn't put it on the chart here, would be for a shomer sachar, would be for a paid watchman. You're having a guy watch your stuff and you're paying him to watch it. So he assumes more responsibility in which he's liable for stolen or lost object, but not reliable for oines, for circumstances beyond his control. Knowing this is going to help us very much understand the coming halachot. Another point to mention is that there is one case where the borrower is exempt, and that is what's called, I didn't put it on the chart here, that's what's called mesa machmas malacha. If the object that he was using broke in the course of regular usage. So if he was just plowing with an animal and the animal collapsed and died, or he was wearing a watch and the watch just broke. If it broke in the course of its regular usage, even the borrower is exempt. But we're going to more be focused on lost and stolen versus circumstances beyond his control. Says the Rambam halacha hey nasan shayre l'shem rechina. A person gives an ox to an unpaid watchman. Umeis hasher, and the ox dies. The ox dies means a case beyond your control. Typically he'd be exempt. The owner of the ox charges the shomer chinam, charges the unpaid watchman, and he tells him, no, where's the ox? Amar loy, and the shomer chinam responds, he denies it. You never deposited anything by me. Or he tells him, yeah, you gave it to me, but you should know that it got stolen or lost. V'nishba, and he swore to his claim. The shomer chinam in this case is exempt from making a false deposit oath. Why? Not because of a knas, but because of the same principle that underlies knas. Had the shomer chinam admitted to the plaintiff's claim and said, yeah, you know what? You deposited it, but it died. He wouldn't be obligated to pay money because he's an unpaid watchman who doesn't pay for circumstances beyond your control. But because he, bottom line, swore falsely, he's liable for a regular oath. Because he swore falsely, any similar case, the law would be the same. That's the shomer chinam, the unpaid watchman. Halacha vav. A person lends an ox to a friend. And he demands and he says to him, where's my ox that you borrowed from me? And indeed, the truth is that the ox had died. Now, when an ox dies for a borrower, he's still liable to replace it. But the borrower lies. And he says, no, it was stolen or lost. And he swore to that claim. He's exempt from the false deposit oath for the flip side reason. Because his denial didn't help him anything. Even if we accept his denial, it was stolen or lost, you're still going to be liable. Either way, he's liable to pay. Whether it was died or stolen or lost or captured, because he's a borrower, as will be explained in the proper place. The borrower assumes the most responsibility. So, because his denial didn't change anything, he's exempt. But again, he's liable for swearing a false regular oath, because he swore falsely. Bottom line, and the same would apply in all cases. This is the guiding rule. If you're ever in doubt about a situation, ask yourself these questions. If the scenario is such that he could not exempt himself from payment besides for this denial, the denial was the only way out of payment, and he swore to that denial, whether he swore on his own initiative or he was adjured by the plaintiff and he denied, he's liable for a false deposit oath. Even if he didn't answer amen, and he never said the word oath, he just denied in response to being adjured, you're held liable. Because your only way out was the denial. But if you would anyways be off the hook without your denial, or you would anyways be on the hook even with your denial doesn't help you, so swearing to your denial doesn't violate the prohibition. A person steals an ox of a friend. So this guy, whose ox was stolen, he comes over to this guy and says, you stole my ox. He says, no, I didn't. So the guy says, if you didn't, what's it doing in your house? Why do I see my ox in your backyard? He says, you deposited it by me for safekeeping. I never stole it. You brought it to the house. And he swore to this claim, and it turns out that he was lying. The bottom line is he'd be liable for making a false deposit oath. Because had he admitted to the original claim of you stole my ox, he would have to pay the worth of the ox anyway. Now by saying that it was a deposit, at least he exempted himself from some level of responsibility. In the case of being a custodian, if it was stolen or lost, he wouldn't have to replace it. If you steal an ox, you're always liable. If you're watching an ox, you're not always liable. Had the ox been stolen or lost after this admission, in other words, the guy would have went home and said, you know what, yeah, you're right, I deposited it, keep watching it. He would now have lowered his responsibility. So since his denial lowered his responsibility, now that it turns out that he's lying, he's liable for the deposit oath. Same thing if it would be a different response. Same conversation. You stole my ox. No, I didn't. What's it doing in your house? He says, I rented it from you. You didn't deposit, I rented it from you. The moment you say I rented it from you, you've lowered your responsibility from being a thief. Had you been a thief, you got to pay fully. Now that you're renting, you only have to pay partially. Because you've exempted yourself from a broken case, a dead case, anything happens beyond your control, a renter is not liable. Even if the guy's response was, not I rented it from you, but I borrowed it from you. Again, guy accuses him, you stole my ox. He says, no, I didn't. What's it doing in your house? I borrowed it from you. Now, borrowing, we said before, carries all the responsibility. So seemingly, what lowering happened here? So here you have to remember the point I mentioned before, that there is one case where a borrower is exempt. Chayav b'shvuas hapikadon, you're liable for making a false deposit oath. Because you've exempted yourself from death during the course of usage. As will be explained in the laws of borrowing. If you're using something normally as a borrower and it dies, it breaks in the course of usage, you're exempt. So by not responding truly that he stole it, and by saying he borrowed it, he lowered his responsibility even in 1 iota. And that 1 iota suffices to make his denial a beneficial denial. And when it's discovered to be false, he's liable to a deposit oath. Therefore, if the response would be all in one, the guy would say, you stole my ox, and instead of going back and forth, he'd immediately say, no, I didn't. He immediately makes one claim and responds, no, I didn't. In fact, you deposited it by me, you hired it to me, you lent it to me. Here's your ox, take it. So he wants to be rid of the responsibility. So he's corrected the situation and given back the ox. The nishbal zan, he swears to that denial. And even if it's discovered that he's lying, he's exempt from the false deposit oath. Because by handing back the ox, he's admitted to the principle. And the denial didn't help him anything. Because again, he handed it back. He's not assuming any more responsibility to keep him liable or not liable in those cases that could emerge later. He doesn't want to stay the custodian. He doesn't want to stay the borrower of the rent. He says, I rented it, I deposited it, and here you go, have it back. Same thing if he told him a similar response. You stole my ox. No, I didn't. In fact, you sold it to me, I just haven't paid for it yet. And you know what? If you want, take the money or just take back the ox. Or he says, you gave it to me in advance, payment of work that I would do for you. You want me to do it, I'll do it, or take the ox. Where he responds, I actually found this ox wandering around the street. I didn't know it was yours. Now that I know, take it and go. Or he says, it simply followed my cow into my backyard. Here, please take it. And he swore to any of these claims. The point of all these claims, the uniting factor is that he's never, after his counterclaim, he never continues assuming responsibility. He says, here, have it back, take it back, it's yours. Even if his oath is discovered to be false, he's exempt from the false oath. Because he never exempted himself from any payment by his claim. Bottom line though, he swore falsely, so he's liable to the regular oath. A person was liable to pay money to two people, or he had a deposit belonging to two people. One of them asked him for it back, and he denied to that one guy, and he swore to the denial. He's liable for making a false deposit oath. Bottom line, he denied restitutional money. If they both asked him for the deposit, to one of them he admits, and he says, I only borrowed money from this guy. And he swears to that. So inherent in his admission to this guy is a denial to that guy. Bottom line is, though, he's exempt from the false oath, because he never exempted himself. Yes, he denied owing it to this partner, but he does accept and admit owing the full amount to the other partner. Nevertheless, if it turns out to be a false oath, he's liable for making a regular false oath. You should have admitted that you owe both the people money, not only one. A person had a loan on document. There are two ways to give a loan. You can give a loan verbally, just witnesses watching, or you can give a loan with an IOU note. So the guy is showing him the IOU note. He says, here, where's my money? The kafar bav nishba, he denies owing the money and he swears to the denial. Pater mishvas hapikadin, he's exempt from the false deposit oath. Because we have a very important principle that once you put a loan down on paper, it creates a lien on all of the borrower's real estate. So in effect, denying the loan is denying something real estate related. We already explained yesterday that anybody who denies a claim made about real estate is exempt from the laws governing the deposit oath. Again, the Rambam says he's liable for the regular false oath which he made, because bottom line is he swore falsely. But in the case at hand for the deposit oath, we're not going to hold him liable. If all he had was not a promissory note, not an actual document, only a loan that was verbal in the presence of witnesses, the kafar v'nishba, and he denies the loan and he swears, so here he's liable for the deposit oath, because in the moment of denial he's helped himself, he's exempted himself from paying the money. Even though in the end of the day the witnesses will come, make him pay, and it will turn out retroactively that his denial didn't help anything. But in the moment it did. Maybe the witnesses won't come. Or maybe if they do come, like this guy may do son. the testimony won't be certified, they'll be disqualified. So in some way, there's a hope that it could be beneficial even for the long term. And therefore now in the moment when he denies the loan, he has helped himself. And if it turns out that it was a false oath, he's liable for making a false oath of deposit.